Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's time to begin. Let me give you just a short notice. We are in Portugal, not in Germany, so it's normal to begin a little bit late. So there are, in the faculty, we talked about the 15 minutes of tolerance. That explains why we did not begin at 10-hour sharp. And we are still waiting for someone, a colleague of us, that is here. She'll come, but later. So it has to do with some, maybe she's coming now. Good, please. So it's also something cultural. But let me say that when I was, for the first time in Hanover, giving lectures, I was given a lecture at 8, and my colleague said he was there expecting me, but he was not. He arrived just at 8:30. And I said, why? And he said, oh, excuse me, I forgot to tell you that we are in a conflict with the government, so they want to enlarge our schedules, so we make them short. We begin 30 minutes after, but sharp. But just 40 minutes after. And the lecture is just 1 hour and a half and not 2, like the government of the state wanted. So it was a kind of a fight. So you also have these cultural problems, but probably a little different from us. Well, let me say first that it's an honor for me being in this panel with my dear colleague and friend, Professor Arndt Künnecke. I know him for 40 years.
40? I'm not that old yet.
I am. Well, maybe 20.
No, not even. I guess we first met in 2012.
12, okay.
13.
But, well, it's such an intense contact that seems longer to me.
It's like
because I participate in the LPS group where Professor Künnecke is involved from the 80s. So I'm one of the oldest members of the group. So I have the idea that each colleague has the same age of me or has the same experience of the group like me. And it's a very well-known professor, and we like him very much in the LPS group. First, he represented a Turkish university. Then he began to be independent and autonomous, cooperating with us. And now I've heard there's a good news that your faculty in the future can also be a part in the Erasmus program. So you can be also a part of the group. But it's also a pleasure having here my distinct colleagues. There are, like me, members of the board, Professor Nuno Cunha Rodrigues, a professor of law and economics, is a specialist in this field, and is president of a Portuguese agency. Well, this time we could not arrange a visit, but next time perhaps it can happen. And we have here also Professor Ruud Saraiva, also from the group of Law and Economics, also a specialist in these questions, and Professor Rui Sairo from my group, from the group of Public Law of the faculty, and is also a specialist in questions of the European Union. And it's a pleasure having you here. It's a nice way of doing. I have a federal university for applied administrative sciences. In Portugal, we have not that scheme. We copied the French scheme of having an autonomous institute, but the idea of having a university, I think it's a good idea, and I'm going to defend it for the future in Portugal. As a moderator, I'm like an orchestral director that should define the tempo of the music, but I prepare just a short talk about the way Portugal and you are connected and how it began, how it evolved through time. And I would say that from 1985 where we signed the agreement for the EU until now, we have had 3 different periods regarding the relation of the Portuguese and the EU. The first period, from 1985 to 1997, was the period of joy and hope. And this idea of joy and hope had to do with the situation that we lived from 74 until 85, and what it meant for the Portuguese people having an agreement to adhere to the EU. We have had, as you know, the revolution of 74, with the suppression of the authoritarian regime and the creation of a democracy. But as you know, to install democracy can be complicated. We had an important political crisis in 75 that was resolved by the elections. And it was funny because the party who won the first elections, the Socialist Party, had a slogan of the campaign that was "Europe with us." And that idea of Europe with us was, at the time, a moment of hope and joy. And that it's something that that involves our presence in the European Union. Then we have the Constitution of 76 that stabilized the political situation. In 82, the first revision of the Constitution with the abolition of the Council of Revolution. There was the West symbol of revolution, the revolutionary political power, and it was in the Constitution. It was suppressed only in 82. And at that time, the market economy was emphasized by the revision. So in 85, that we had all the conditions to see Europe as, in first place, joy. We were glad to be a member of the EU. And at the time, it was a time of hope. And I remember the first time Jacques Delors, the president of the Commission, visited Portugal, and he said he was impressed with the things he was appreciating in Portugal, because he said that in Portugal, every new enterprise, every new activity that was sponsored by the EU had a poster, a tablet, a sign saying this is supported by the EU. And that also helped to create this spirit of joy and hope that was evident in Portugal. The only exception between the political parties at the time was the Communist Party. But even the Communist Party said, well, let's see, let's try. If it's good for the workers, maybe it can work. So the language was also in a good mood. When I say we can talk about a unanimity of the people about that. Then we have a second period from 97 to 2015. That was the period of disillusion and resentment. And this idea of disillusion and resentment has to do with the mismatch between European and Portuguese political policies, political and economic. From the EU perspective, it was the time after the creation of the euro, to make an affirmation of fiscal policies and try to fight the debt. And it was the time of the Pact of Stability and Growth in 1997, and the idea that Europe should fight against indebtedness. There was a search for budgetary balance, and this was a way of dealing with financial crisis in America, with the Lehman Brothers bankruptcy, and after that in Europe. On Portugal, the perspective was the opposite. We have had wasteful policies of successive governments that led to state indebtedness, financial crisis, obliged us to adopt restrictionist policies. We had inflation, we had a rise in unemployment, even if the unemployment in Portugal was controlled. And the situation worsened so much that we needed to negotiate the bailout program from 2010 to 2014. And the idea was that we were governed not by our government, by the Troika. Troika meant the EU, meant the World Bank, and meant the Portuguese government. So this was the time of, well, let us say, dissolution and the time of resentment. Because the public opinion blamed the situation on Europe. And the Portuguese people felt like they were a kind of victim of European policies. Then the third period began in 2015, and it is what we are living now. We had appeasement and moderate satisfaction. Let us say that we had a successful public economic policy of the government by a strange coalition, the so-called geringonça, a strange thing. It's a name that we adopt in Portugal to name this kind of government that was of the Socialist Party, but has support of every left, even the Bloc left, even Communist Party supported the government, and they made an European policy, so something really strange from a European point of view, a European perspective, and even from a Portuguese point of view. But they were successful with their economic policy, and they were able to reconcile the fight against budget deficits with some economic growth. And for the first time in this period, we had the budget balance. We achieved it 2 years ago, and that's the situation that we are having now, even having changed the government, because now we have a center-right government that inherited this good situation. So there was an appeasement in the population, and there is a moderate satisfaction of the majority of the people with the EU. And things are going a good way. But at the same time now, we have a rejection of a large number of people in Portugal, and we have in the parliament far-right populist party that is completely against Europe, and also the extreme left parties don't like the idea of Europe. So I can say that we have appeasement and moderate satisfaction from the majority, but we have a little more than 1/3 of the population that rejects the EU. So after COVID-19 and the problems we had, the EU created, as you know, the Recovery and Resilience Pacts. And these pacts, because they mean money to some countries like Portugal, and they also mean investment and public investment, so on, are very well seen, and they are able to create some trust and confidence in the EU. But on the other hand, we must know the strong opposition that we have. And it's a critical situation that you have also in Europe. Unfortunately, it's something that happens in France, in Germany, in Spain, of having a populist right-wing party very strong and always threatening the political situation everywhere. So this was my introduction. So now it's time to hear the real specialists. I give the floor to Professor Nuno Cunha Rodrigues, thanking him for being here. He's a wonderful professor, a wonderful scientist. I think you'll enjoy his talk.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor Vasco. It's a pleasure to be here. Welcome to Lisbon. Welcome to the Law School of Lisbon. I hope you enjoy not only the Faculty of Law, but hope you can enjoy Lisbon. For the German standards, the weather is wonderful. Although for Portuguese standards, the weather is awful. One of the things is it never snows in Lisbon. My students coming from Germany, usually they ask me about Christmas in Portugal, how it works, and how it snows in Lisbon. And I explain that it never snows in Lisbon. It has never snowed in Lisbon. So for German standard, I suppose it's good to be in Lisbon, and you have many things to enjoy during this week. Also, so a compliment to your professor. Thank you for bringing your students to the Faculty of Lisbon.
It's our pleasure.
And also to Professor Vasco to invite me. He's the head of the Erasmus office, and he's the really important professor here at the Faculty of Law. And also to my colleagues and friends, Professor Hood and Professor Hood. So the title of this conference, I would say, is kind of provocative, asking what were the profits of Portugal from being a member of the EU. I really don't fully agree with the question, because I think that the European Union is not a club. It's not something that you can do the math of what you receive and what you're giving back. You know, the EU is a project of peace, prosperity, you know, and we have to, of course, we are a younger generation, in my case, in your case, and we don't have the memory of the Second World War and all that traumatized the EU. And was, you know, what's behind the project of EU is a project to join people, to join the countries in order to create an area of peace, of prosperity, of solidarity. And that's the key word when it comes to the EU, solidarity among member states. So it's not really of giving and receiving, of doing the math. So that's why I don't really fully agree with the title of what Portugal is profiting from being a member of the EU. We're not profiting because we are, you know, members of this project of peace, of prosperity. When you're a fan of a club, you don't think of the financial risk of the club. You join the club because you're passionate about the club. So that's the same when it comes to the EU. So of course, there are problems when it comes to the relation between Portugal and the EU. So I will bring two problems I think that we have when it comes to deal with the EU. The first is the economic dimension of the EU, and the second is the political dimension of the EU. So let me start with the first when it comes to the interplay between the European Union and Portugal, the economic dimension. And to be clear, I'm speaking about the economic and monetary union. I'm speaking about the euro as a currency that raises some problems in Portugal, and I will explain that. I will elaborate about this. Because after the completion of the internal market in the 80s and in the 90s, the next step of the economic integration of the EU was the creation of an economic and monetary union, the EMU. I think that the EU was ahead when it comes to economic dimension from a political dimension, where we stand behind what was the intention of the founding fathers. But the economic and monetary union that was created in the 90s after the changes, the amendments that were made in the Maastricht Treaty, led to the creation of this eurozone, of the euro currency within the European Union. And the idea was to mimetize, to replicate the functioning of the economy in the United States of America. The United States of America, we had what a famous economic award winner, Nobel economic award winner, Robert Mundell, spoke about in the 60s, year 60s. We had there in the USA an optimal currency area because we didn't have, and we don't have within the USA language barriers, cultural barriers. We have a federal budget, we have a federal state, and that's why it works in the US. So in the 90s, we tried to replicate this idea of the US in Europe. But the thing is that in Europe, we still have language barriers, we still have cultural barriers among the member states. When you look at the Hollywood movies and you see someone that gets unemployed in New York one day, and the same person has a job, gets a job in Los Angeles the next day, he will move to Los Angeles. He has no language barriers, no cultural barriers. But if someone gets unemployed in Lisbon today and tomorrow gets a job in Warsaw, Poland, which is more or less the same distance as between New York and Los Angeles, I would bet that 90% of Portuguese people would not move to Warsaw because they don't know how to speak Polish, because of the weather, because there are so many cultural differences, you know. So that's one thing. Another thing is that the EU don't really have, the European Union doesn't have a federal budget like in the US. The EU budget is very small when compared with the American one. So that doesn't allow the European Union to cover all this asymmetric difference between member states. The thing that Portugal is less developed when it comes to economy when compared to Germany. If we had a federal budget similar to the US within the EU, that would allow the European Union to distribute all this money among the less developed countries, similar to what was made like in the US during the Obama administration. Maybe you don't remember, but during the financial crisis, 2010, 2011, the area of Detroit suffered a lot. The automotive industry, all these cars industry, they suffered a lot. And what the federal state did was throw out lots of money to the destroyed industry in order to recover. But that's forbidden in the EU because you have the prohibition of state aid. So national governments cannot give money to national companies because that's forbidden according to the treaty, Article 107, number 1 of the Treaty of Functioning of the European Union. So we don't have, although we had the same idea of the optimal currency areas that was transposed to the European Union in the 90s, the thing is that we don't have the same idea of functioning as they have in the US. So that leads to many imbalances when it comes to the work of the European Monetary Union. Because at the same time, we created in the EU a single currency, which is the euro. But the thing is that we have different economies working at the same time within the EU. Germany, our economy, is much more developed than the Portuguese one. But the thing is that if you have a different currency in Germany, as we had in Portugal, the German currency would be valuating, and the Portuguese currency would be devaluating. But having a single currency, euro, that doesn't work because we cannot balance and imbalance currencies among member states. So what we should have that we don't have within the European Union, a federal budget that would allow to correct the economic and the trade imbalances among the EU. So that harms a little bit the Portuguese economy, and I would say that benefits the German economy because we cannot devaluate our money. So one thing is that Portugal is not really profiting from being a member of the EU, as the title might suggest. Yeah, right. Of course, we are receiving money from the EU, structural funds and all that. We are receiving, and that has allowed a lot Portugal to build high roads, to build schools, to have a new economy working. We are benefiting from being part of this internal market where we have all these freedoms of movement. But we are not benefiting from the idea of having an European and monetary union. So what should be done about this? First of all, we should have a real federal budget when it comes to the EU. And that is being started to be done. We have a new project among the EU, which is the Next Generation EU. It is a project of financing the economy. And it started after the COVID-19 situation. And it's being funded for the first time by loans that are raised by the European Union itself. The EU had never had loans to finance the economy among member states. And the first time it did that was after the COVID-19 situation with this Next Generation EU program. So it's kind of a small step to create a federal budget and to correct all these imbalances of the European Monetary Union. Another thing is to close the so-called banking union. I don't know if you are aware of what is the banking union. According to the banking union, some of the biggest EU banks, some of the biggest banks in Germany, like the Deutsche Bank, or in Portugal, the biggest banks are no longer supervised on a national basis, but by the European Central Bank in Frankfurt, because those are not considered to be national banks, but European banks. And so they are supervised by an EU agency, an EU institution in this case, which is the European Central Bank that is based in Frankfurt. But one of the things when it comes to the banking union is that these big banks, the so-called significant banking institutions, are supervised by the Frankfurt, by the European Central Bank, but the banking union is still not closed because it's based in 3 pillars. The first pillar is about supervision of banks, that it's being made for the biggest banks by the ECB. The second pillar is the so-called resolution pillar, which is in case a bank gets in a financial trouble, it will be the EU to try to help that bank and to resolve that bank. And then the third pillar is about the deposit scheme guarantee. You know, if you are a client of a bank and you have a deposit in the bank, according to the third pillar, if the bank gets bankrupt, the fund will cover all the deposits that you had in that bank. But that third pillar is still not yet functioning because there is a political disagreement among the member states. For example, the German government thinks that it doesn't have to create this third pillar because it doesn't have to finance or solve the problems of the Greek banks or the Portuguese banks or other types of banks. So, but on the other hand, people say, okay, but some of the problems that could be solved by this third pillar would help even German banks such as the Deutsche Bank. The Deutsche Bank had some problems a few years ago. And so that would be a way to solve some of the problems that were faced by the Deutsche Bank. So here, the key word that it's lacking to solve this problem of creation of the third pillar of the banking union is again the word of solidarity, that sometimes we are missing behind. The European Union, going back to from where I started, is a project of solidarity. So member states should, try to overcome all these political difficulties, remembering what's the basis of the project of the European Union. It's not an idea of profit or of doing the math. It's a project of solidarity. So that's when it comes to the banking union. I've mentioned already the economic and monetary union. Also, the EU tried to raise new instruments, new tools to deal with financial crisis. It was created in 2010, the European Financial Stability Mechanism, which allows now to try to overcome some of the problems of public debts that were at the forefront of the financial crisis in 2010 and 2011, and also to create some rules when it comes to budgetary rules among member states that were created according to the legislation of the EU. And according to that legislation, if there are economic imbalances among member states, the EU has now the tools to try to correct those imbalances, even if those imbalances are based not only in situations of deficit, but also of surplus of the economies. If an economy has a large surplus, maybe something is happening. Why is that economy overheated when compared to other economies? So now the EU has some tools to try to correct these imbalances. Another topic that we can discuss here is the legitimacy of the EU when it comes to the democratic process. The truth is that many times in Portugal also, people feel that the EU is about a project that is distant from people. So we are a peripheral country, we have a long flight to get here. And in Portugal, one of the things that sometimes we forget that we are members of the EU, and that's also because there is a lack of democracy when it comes to the institutions, the functioning of the institution of the EU. That is trying to be corrected throughout the years, And now we have the elections to the European Parliament that are based on the direct vote. So we have these elections. We have now in Portugal, the majority of the political parties are in favor of the EU project. We don't see many discussions of people trying to raise issues of Portugal leaving the EU. We are all part of the EU, and that's, I think, it's specific in Portugal. But the thing is that we always have to try to raise some awareness people when it comes to the EU. And also, the EU has to give back a little bit to people. And that was the idea that started in 92 when the European citizenship was created according to the Treaty on Functioning of the European Union. You are German citizens, we are Portuguese citizens, but at the end we are all European citizens. And that's stated in the treaties, in the European treaties, the concept of European citizenship. And that's a way try, to put the things, in context. We are European citizens, and so this idea of there is a gap between the EU and the citizen, Portuguese citizens, tries to be covered, tries to be filled by this concept of European citizenship, by the idea of participating in the process of electing members of the European Parliament, and also indirectly our institutions such as the European Commission, where of course it's up to the governments to elect, to appoint the commissioners, but there is an indirect participation of the citizens of the member states in doing the European Commission. I don't want to take in much time, just to wrap up, so I would say that we still have work to do among the European Union. We still have to correct the functioning of the European Monetary Union. The EU is not a project that it's made of math, of giving and receiving. It's a project of solidarity, but at the end, I think it's a single project when it comes to the world that you look at. It's really a successful project. Look at what was the European Union and what we have done up until now since the years 50s of the last century. It's a project of peace, solidarity, and prosperity. The Erasmus program is the example. We have up until now, I think there are 1 million Erasmus babies, people study, due to the success of the Erasmus program. So an example of the good things that the European Union are bringing to citizens, and we hope to continue in the future. So again, thank you so much for your attention for these moments, and of course I'm up to answer any questions that you have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Cunha Rodrigues. It was a very interesting speech. And now I give the floor to Professor Ruth Saraiva, also from the group of Law and Economics, also member of our board of direction of international relations of the faculty. And it's a pleasure and an honor having you here.
Thank you, Professor. Good morning, everyone. So I hope you're enjoying Lisbon and enjoying our law school, and that you have already tasted pastéis de Belém or pastéis de nata. Yes? No? Yeah?
The second Belém is still on the way on Thursday when we go to the monastery.
Okay.
Also the connection with the
But
treaty.
you can.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, but you can taste them everywhere. Basically, it's if you go to the bars, you will have that experience. And because of the European Union, by the way, you can now experience them basically all over Europe because we're exporting pastéis de nata to everywhere. So you have like small pastries where you can, bakeries where you can buy these pastries. So Professor Nuno actually ate part of my presentation talking about the banking union and about the title of this conference. But I would say it starts with a bias, which is a positive bias, because we talk about profiting, which means benefiting. So we're not looking at the question as how much are we losing? We're looking at it in a more positive way. How much are we gaining from being in the European Union? And by the way, the Portuguese people are the ones who are more happy and thrilled in being in the European Union. 85% of people in Portugal is pleased with the fact that we are members of the European Union, which is the highest number in Europe. And one of the main reasons because of this has to do with money. So I know Professor Nuno was talking about, yes, we want peace and solidarity, and there is a political side to the European Union, but in the end, it's economics, stupid, right? It's all about economics. So if the money entering from the EU is higher than the money we have to give back to the EU is larger, we'll be happy. And the fact is, with the EU money that we still are getting for asymmetries issues, which means that Portugal is quite constant, not only with sun, but also in being in the last group of the European countries in terms of economics. So there's a lot of countries coming into the EU, like, Eastern countries, and we are still in the last group of countries. So we're quite consistent. So this means that we're still getting money, which explains one of the reasons behind the third pillar of the banking union not being built, which means there's a distrust by some members of the European Union attached to the fact that some countries, especially southern countries, which, by the way, have sun, wine, and women, as the Dutch politician said. So that's our problem. We have women, sun, and wine. By the way, you have to try the sun one day, the wine another day, and women, men, whatever you want to try, because also Portuguese men are quite good. So, yeah, we have your sun. So basically the idea is, okay, so this is supposed to be a project for peace, for prosperity, for solidarity, but in the end, if you think about it, these are assets that guarantee economic prosperity. So if we have political stability, if we have peace, if we have some kind of reciprocity that is not, how should I put, it's not completely altruistic, it has other means, then you guarantee actually economic growth. And Portugal has a number of money coming in, especially funds. For instance, now we are trying to spend a lot of money that we got from the EU, and that is why we are so happy with the EU, Or our highways were built with money from the EU. All of our traffic system, et cetera, is from EU funding. Some part of our energy solutions come from the EU, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Even having tourism and Erasmus students also comes from the EU. So basically, especially from the EU. So in the end, it's more of an economic question than actually a political one. And the fact is, we are lagging both politically and economically worldwide. You have the US, you have China, you have India, you have Russia, politically being more and more important. So the EU has to find a way to become more important. And normally, every time the EU has a problem, it does two things. Do you know what the EU does normally to solve its own problems with the fact that it's lacking in political or economic terms? What do we do as Europeans? Every time we have a cold, we do two things. We enlarge and we go deeper in terms of integration. And the European Banking Union is an example of this cold. We had a cold, so what do? We go deeper. we go to a more federal level to solve national problems and European problems. And if you look at the banking union, you will see that what happens is we are giving, for instance, the European Central Bank the power to do prudential supervision of large banks. But if you read the regulation, actually, the European Central Bank can, as it becomes more experienced in that field, to get the supervision of smaller banks. So one day you might have the European Central Bank doing everything in terms of prudential supervision. And another way, you can also see there's, when you look at that kind of regulation attached to the prudential supervision, there's a balance between the national level and there's a code. So we're enlarge and go deeper in our integration. So when you look at that specific regulation, you will see also there's a need of the national level. We're not completely federal. We still need the national level. And one of the reasons we need the national level is because of what Professor Nuno was saying, which is we have different cultures. We have different realities. And for instance, what the ECB did in order to build this banking union and in order to have its powers in terms of prudential supervision was getting people from the national authorities, like for instance, the Portuguese central bank, working as if they were members of the European Central Bank, because no one in Frankfurt would speak in Portuguese or would understand Portuguese law. And by the way, there's, in financial terms of financial law, there's little Portuguese law. The same thing happens with environmental law. There's little Portuguese law. It's European law. So the fact that it's written in Portuguese is just a detail, but it's actually Portuguese. So it's in financial law, it's more than that. It's more than European law. Actually, it's common law because it comes from soft law that actually draws from the biggest markets, which, by the way, are the American markets. So they will get to Europe in that sense. So one of the things that we have now, and this is one thing that we might profit, but also has costs, is a lot of legal frameworks for a lot of things, from banking to capital markets to insurance to environment to energy, to telecommunications, to whatever you want, there's always a law. And that's also a problem, because sometimes that law is not taught at the specificity level of the national aspects, which means that, for instance, if you look at financial law, it's beautiful for very evolved markets. It might not be adequate for smaller markets. And we Portuguese like to be very good students. We are poor, but very good students. So this means that every time Europe deepens into integration, we're there. We're always there, you know, even if it's not adapted to us. And that's a problem too, okay? So there's benefits. There's also some downsides to this. One downside has to do, for instance, with the euro. So it will be sold to you as a very good thing. I believe it's a very good thing, but it has a cost. One of the costs means that nationally, I don't have the means to find, how should I put, to find ways to pay my bills other than taxes. I don't have monetary policy, which means I don't have the main instrument to build my economy. So this is not given at the national level, it's given at the federal level. So I have no eggs for my omelet. The only egg I have is tax. So I will tax people in order to have funds at the national level. And we always tax the same people. The ones that work for third parties, right? That cannot actually evade in terms of tax law. So it means I'm always paying taxes for everyone in Portugal. And that's another problem, which is we evolved economically with the European Union, but in terms of taxes, we are far behind. It's true we have indirect taxation that is harmonized, but in terms of direct taxation, it's not. So this means that you have, for instance, for financial markets or for work market or for whatever market you want, differences in terms of taxation. And this will lead to asymmetries in terms of the way we grow economically. So there's fear of failure. And because it's the last land of sovereignty for most countries, for all the countries in the European Union, we don't want to have that power, especially for direct taxation, delivered to the European Union. And because we don't have that, we have asymmetries that are growing. And one of the biggest issues right now in Portugal is taxation. The taxes are taxes for rich people, not for Portuguese people. Which means that this has problems in terms of firms, in terms of private initiative, et cetera, So in the end, what counts is the money we have in our pockets. For the Portuguese people, most of them don't see that taxes are high because of all this conjuncture of being inside the EU, and that this has a price. They will see this as a national problem, which is built for the fact that we are inside the EU. What we see is money coming in. And if we see money's coming in, we're there, so we still have some joy. Even, I know Professor Vasco was talking about the extreme right parties in Portugal and the fact that now they're not enjoying EU. The fact is, while there's money, they will like it. If the money is not coming, they will dislike it. So basically, in the end, it has all to do with money. That's why I'm a law and economics professor, and I have no money. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And now, last but not least, Professor Rui Lanceiro is a member of my group, the Public Policy Group, the Public Law Group, and is also a member of the Erasmus Office. So it's a pleasure and an honor having you here. Rui, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Professor. Thank you for inviting me here to speak with the students, and welcome. I hope you enjoy your stay here. We do believe we are a tropical country. That is why there is no heating here, and it's terribly cold inside, probably colder than outside. So perhaps one day we will understand that we are not a tropical country and we are in fact European.
With climate change will become tropical.
Probably Saharan. My work here is much facilitated by the introduction by Professor Vasco and the talks by my friends and colleagues, Nuno and Ruth. But my point of view is markedly different. My point of view is political, public law. So I will disagree strongly with Ruth on the matter of it's only money. Okay, I will go back to the point of departure, the point where our current democracy was born in 74, 75, 76. In those days, we were in the end of, if we take outside the USSR, we had the longest standing dictatorship in Europe. Okay, we had a dictatorship from 1926 up until 74. And when we became a democracy during the revolution, the idea was to follow the 3D plan. So decolonization, democratization, development. Decolonization was essential. We lost the train to decolonize correctly. We ended up in colonial wars that dragged forever. We had more males listed in army service in terms of percentage than Americans went to the Vietnam War. And that is a scar. The dictatorship is a scar, that is a scar. So in terms of the European Union as a project of peace, for us it's a different kind of peace, but it's also a kind of peace, but mostly also in terms of identity. During the dictatorship, to run away from the idea that we were a colonial power and we should decolonize, the dictatorship saw the idea that we were in fact a pluricontinental country. So Portugal is more than this. Portugal, there were posters stating Portugal is not a small country with all the colonies over Europe, meaning that, of course, with the colonies, we were one of the biggest countries in Europe. But to decolonize was to face the reality that we are, in fact, a small to medium country, pretty much in the periphery of Europe, that nobody really cares about. So we have, I think, an identity crisis. And the idea was to fully embrace the identity of the European identity. And we did fully embrace it. We are one of the best students always in the European Union. Hence, also, we felt very hurt when during the crisis, the economic crisis, by being treated as a poor student. We are not a poor student. How could we be treated so badly by the European Union when we gave so much to the European Union? So I think that is this idea of identity. We're still struggling with it. I remember when our Prime Minister took office, one of the first trips was to Brussels, of course, and in the television it was announced that one of the first visits of the Prime Minister was to Europe, which is kind of amazing because I truly believe that we were in Europe. But that's the idea that Brussels, outside of the Pyrenees, there is Europe, and we are still not really believing that we were let into the European Union because, of course, during the dictatorship, as we were not a democratic country, we were unable to enter the economic European communities. So one of the main goals after the revolution was to become a part of it. That was one of the goals during the 70s, the 80s. We have posters, we have pins, we have songs. There is a popular song from the 80s that says, "I want to see Portugal in the EC."
You play it for you.
It's good. Portuguese well from the 80s. And so it became a goal. It became also an identity goal. We have lost our identity as a colonial power, so we became an European country and an European identity. So we have that as related to the colonization. Democratization was also, of course, also linked with becoming a part of the European integration. The idea was that we needed to secure our democracy, secure rule of law, and the only way to do that was being a part of the EC, the European. That was the club of democracies, and once we had become part of that club, there was no way we could go back. Nowadays, we can see that that was quite innocent of ours, because there are, as you know, illiberal democracies in the European Union, and the growth of the far right, of course, associated with other foreign powers, but I still believe that being a part of the EU is still a guarantee of the democracy of our country and the rule of law. And finally, development. In that sense, development to open up our borders, to become an European economy, not an economy dependent on the colonies, to have received funds, of course, the funds were important to the development, the training of our workers, the development of our economy, the development of infrastructure, transport infrastructure, but also other infrastructure. That was essential. So that was the plan, and here we are. My first point is, it's a matter of identity. We are Europeans. We enjoy being Europeans. And I also think that looking outwards from Europe, or looking to other powers, looking to China, looking to even the closest power to our way of seeing the world, I think, United States, Canada, Australia, there is a different sense of policy. There is a different sense of values. European values are different. We are not the same. We have cultural differences, but there is something there. There is a shared past, a shared, even if imagined, a shared present, and the idea of a shared future together. Of course, what Portugal also receives from being in the European Union is that by being a small to medium European country, we can play a much larger role in the world that we would alone if we were alone. Our voice matters more as one of the 27 that we've each just one in 198 member states of the EU, of the United Nations. I don't believe that the Portuguese would be Secretary General of the United Nations if we were not part of it. So our role in the world, our identity, our role in the world, and of course, then policies. They're taking environmental policies. One of my fields of study is environmental law, and that is my master's, Professor Vasco. And in that sense, there was a huge agreement in the 80s on the importance of environmental policy. The first framework law on the environment was approved unanimously by the parliament. All the parties, from the right to the extreme left, all parties agreed that the importance of the framework law for the environment. But then it was left undeveloped, unregulated, up until we were forced to implement environmental impact assessments, the prevention and the prevention and mitigation of pollution, the prevention of industrial accidents law, all of the environmental law that we have is transposition of directives. We had to be dragged to comply with environmental law. Perhaps this is part of the cultural part of being in the south of Europe, and the environmental consciousness was more present in the north of Europe. But that is a legacy, as well as in other policy areas. We are strongly influenced by European policy. Finally, in terms of public administration, I think this is what also you want to hear. Our public administration was strongly framed by us belonging in the EU, either by the public economical sector that was very strong after the revolution. After the revolution, we had a socialization stage, and being in the EU led to a huge number of privatizations. To open up to the market economy was one of the legacies of becoming a part of the EU. But also the doublement fonctionnel, the two hats that the public administration has as both being a national public administration and the public administration of the EU is also important. That there is a growing number of agencies, bodies that we need to have because they are provided for, established in directives, in regulations, in terms of data protection, in terms of telecommunications, in terms of banking, in terms of all of that. There is an influence on the structure of public administration that comes from Europe. Also professionalization, debureaucratization drive that was led by the European Union and of course funded by the European Union, in a sense. And finally, our administrative law, especially not the organization, but the procedural law was pretty much French 19th century administrative law. To become part of the EU was to become part of a new wave of Europeanization of administrative law, not Europeanization, through the French Revolution and the adoption of 19th century ideas of administrative law, but a new wave of good governance, of principles, of organization, of the fundamental rights of the citizen as a person before the administration, a huge influence by German administrative law also, and in that sense, a huge influence also, let's be honest, of the case law of the European Court of Human Rights and of the European Convention on Human Rights that was also a part. So in the end, my point is that it is not only a matter of money, but also a matter of identity, of our role in the world, and the structure of our rule of law and our state and our administration. Thank you very much.
So, different visions, different perspectives, lots of things to discuss. But before giving you the floor, I'll ask Professor Arndt Künnecke to do some commentary, and then you'll have the floor. Is it okay?
Yes, thank you very much for the very interesting presentations. And I guess as we expected, there were lots of different views on the European Union. Unfortunately, me and my students did not cover and go too much into detail within the structure and all the politics of the European Union yet, because they're just first-year students. But the interesting thing is 3 professors from the same country and 3 different points of view. First of all, my colleague to the left emphasized the European Union is nothing you could judge on benefits and profits. It's the main idea of solidarity, of course, with some shortcomings. He mentioned the missing common budget, so you can't distribute money where it's needed because there's no such one pot where you put in the money and distribute it. The banking union was mentioned by 2 colleagues, and also that one of the shortcomings is from the Portuguese point of view that there is some feeling of distance. That was what my colleague to the left emphasized, but then coming to the, sorry for me, for the far right. So you mentioned something which is definitely not far right position. You mentioned that the Portuguese ones are the most satisfied people within the European Union. And her point was, why are you satisfied? Take a look in your pockets. When there's some money, you can go shopping out in Lisbon, even the main street with lots of fancy shops. That's cool. So the person who gives you the money, in that case, the European Union, is the one who shows, who makes you not a rich country, a rich person, but at least the one who can afford the things they like. And the more is in your pockets, the more comfortable your life is. That was some point from the colleague to the right, and also going on that path, being connected with monetary issues. One thing I found very interesting that you mentioned the Portuguese are very good students. Unfortunately, today I just have German students with me.
They will marry a Portuguese.
Yes. I don't want to repeat what Portugal is about, with the sun and something else. Yeah, so the thing is, you benefit from a system which is new because you're curious and you try to learn and you try to be a good student, because being a good student means you're prepared for life. I mean, because life is developing and also the environment is changing. So if you learn the important things, hopefully that puts you in a better position. And this is, if this is a characteristic of the Portuguese, that's something very remarkable, I think, because it means even though things are changing, you try to adapt and you accept that there's somebody who gives you some input which brings you forward. And but also on that point, being a good student, you also mentioned the shortcomings or the dark side of it, because some things you try to learn just do not fit. You follow a path, but you find out it's a dead end at the end, because some international, in that case, European Union laws do not 100% fit with the Portuguese traditions. And sometimes it might be better to find your own way, but it's restricted because the European Union does not offer you the chance to do it your own way, unless it gives you some leeway, some freedom in implementing some laws. But the influence on the European Union law, on the Portuguese law, was very much emphasized and clarified by you. And this brings me to the third colleague with the presentation, saying, yes, first of all, emphasizing the history of the Portuguese identity. I don't know, that's something also we Germans might have suffered from, but not in that specific area. But having been a big country, one of the big players in the world, and now being reduced after, in the Portuguese case, losing all the colonies. So we've got some students here, right? I talked with the ladies there. They came from Brazil. That was all Portuguese territory. This beautiful big country was all Portuguese, and
also from Angola, from Guinea. I don't know if there's anyone from Mozambique. No.
So you see, the Portuguese did not forget about their history. So, and just imagine when you're reduced to that small, tiny country with beautiful weather at the Atlantic coast, and a pretty small one in Europe, one among the ones at the end of the hierarchy, that does something with you, and that leads you to some identity crisis. So you need to find a new identity, and they found by getting rid of the dictatorship. That's one thing, but of course we learned already yesterday it's a pretty new democracy. It's like my age, and so
It's exactly my age. I was born in 1974, so. Exactly.
No, just a year. I mean that's something. When you lose some identity, you have to find a new one. So the new identity after the dictatorship was becoming a rule of law country and a democracy. But that's something you need to learn. It doesn't come from one day to the other. Okay, from today on, dictatorship is over. That was yesterday. Today is democracy. It doesn't work like this. It's something you needs to develop. And in this way, the European Union became very important, because that's also what you mentioned. It was a kind of anchor. It was kind of roadmap to become a stable democracy and a rule of law. Why? Because the European Union demanded that from its members. So Portugal was kind of on a safe harbor because they had some assistance in becoming a strong rule of law state and a strong democracy. And also with the advantages and disadvantages. And these are just some little parts of the presentations I could summarize, but this shows the lots of different aspects for Portugal, how it somehow suffered from being a member in the European Union and somehow benefited from it. And it's all kind of balancing out, seeing the positive, seeing the negative points. So hopefully for you, it was kind of some input to focus on more specific points to ask, because we've got lots of experts here sitting. I'm not the expert on Portugal. I'm just here, and thanks to my dear colleague Vasco next to me, we have the opportunity to learn firsthand from the person in the country about that country. So please take your chance and ask some questions, because that's the one and only opportunity to hear from these well-known experts about these issues. So the floor is yours. Show that also German students are good students. Put some pressure on them, that's always good.
Yeah.
Please.
I have a question for Wu Saraya. It's a talk about taxation as one of the only possibilities of the member states. Do you think that at some point 27 member states will let you tax citizens or have differences?
Actually, it's being done. First thing, thank you for the question. Second thing, I have to make a statement. I said this is all about economics, right? But actually, me, personally, I love the project for its identity, for the solidarity, etc., etc. So this is my cynical point of view about it all being about economics, because in the end, for the voter, most of the time, it's about economics. And we've seen this, for instance, in the US right now. So in the end, you vote with your pocket, you don't vote with your ideals most of the time. So that was one point. And the other point has to do with the fact that taxes are quite important in our pockets. And actually what is happening is it's not being treated at the European level, it's being treated at an international level. Why? Because nowadays you have a digital economy. The world is completely globalized. And most of the things you have nowadays are not done physically. They're done through, they're done online, basically. So what happens is you can change your server to another country. You can have several ways of not having a connection to a territory. So this has to make the countries all over the world to unite and find a solution. So you have a lot of projects right now in terms of having taxation, for instance, for multinationals, for having taxation for very rich people. So it's a way to actually try to deal with this, because in the end, and this has to do with economics, by the way, it's a game. Because if you change, for instance, your tax law in a way to make it more accessible to people, this will mean that the other countries will have to adapt and adjust to the way you're playing. And then you will adjust again. And sometimes this will lead to a slippery slope, which means that in the end, nobody is, for instance, taxing anybody, or everybody is taxing too much everybody. So you have to deal with this at a higher level, and it's being done, especially through the OECD. And so we'll see. At the European level, we already have harmonization in terms of indirect taxation. So VAT is an European tax. Okay. So what happens is, for instance, I'll give you an example. In Portugal, of some time ago, we wanted to decrease the taxes on diapers, and because we thought it was an essential item. especially because some poor people could not afford buying diapers for babies and wanted to change the value of the tax, of the VAT upon diapers, and could not change it because it's a European tax. So there's advantages, and there are, it's everything about the solutions we find, European law, whatever, German law, Portuguese law, whatever. They're like medicine. They will always have positive effects and counter effects. And it's a question of balance on how you're going to use that medicine. So protective, nowadays we're talking more internationally to solve that problem.
If I may add, I also think that the European Union works pretty much not really in a coherent and well-planned manner, but in reaction to crisis. So we had a monetary crisis, we solved the monetary crisis. We had a migration crisis, we tweaked the migration rule. We had COVID, so we now have health union that we didn't have before. So I think we will only advance to a more integrated fiscal policy when and if there is some sort of disaster or scandal.
More questions?
You mentioned that Portugal is one of the most pro-EU countries within the Union. Do you think there are any lessons other countries could take from Portugal to deal with the rising EU skepticism?
That's a very good question and a difficult one to answer because it's cultural. And as Professor Nunu was saying at the beginning, we're not the US, which means we all have different cultures. And to do that, I would have to adapt to your specificities. So for instance, in Hungary, I would have to change the way I approach the European Union. Maybe looking at, I normally work with behavioral economics, which means working with psychology and behavioral sciences applied to law. And there is a thing called laws aversion, and you can play with that. For instance, passing messages that instead of profiting with the European Union, you might be losing by not being with the European Union. So the same sentence means the same thing, but it's perceived in a different way, which means that, for instance, if I tell you, okay, this medicine has 95% chance of helping you, okay? Now, if I tell you this medicine has 5% chance of not working, your perception is completely different. 95% is great, 5% it's huge, right? But it's exactly the same thing. So maybe I would have to work with some biases that are more culturally prevalent in some cultures than others, etc. But I don't know. For us, it's not only a question of identity. It's, although I understand the thing about identity, but at the same time, you have to think that we are 900 years old as a country, which means that actually we don't have an identity problem, a very strong identity problem. And I will tell you a very funny story. When you watch an American movie or whatever, you always see a flag, right? The American flag is everywhere. In Portugal, we don't need that, and we didn't need this until a Brazilian soccer trainer came to Portugal to train our national team. We didn't have this thing of putting the flag and showing we were Portuguese. We just assume we are Portuguese. You can see. You look at us and you see, she's Portuguese, he's Portuguese, right?
Or Turkish, Italians. We don't really have a specific.
But the truth is, with this soccer trainer, with this football trainer, he said, okay, because he's Brazilian, right? And Brazil is quite new as a nation. So why not putting flags on your window? And there were not enough flags to put it in our windows. And we had Chinese shops doing the flags. So our flag had, instead of castles, it has these Chinese palaces in the flag. Because there were not enough flags. So I don't know if we have an identity problem that strong, but we always saw us as world kind of open country, and that's different for other countries. So I don't know how we would do it, but maybe they would help you.
I completely agree that we don't have an identity problem because our borders were secure for most of the time since the French independence during the French Revolution. That is one of the good sides of being in the periphery of Europe, not being in Central Europe. But we do have a low self-esteem problem.
Yes.
Portuguese are very different from Spanish are hombre. We are just quiet in the corner. And I think the low self-esteem helps with the idea of being a good student because we feel we need to be a good student to prove that we deserve to be in the European Union. We still don't really believe that you let us in. Being saying this, one of our most famous writers from the 19th century, also told us that things that happen in Europe, once again, things that happen in Europe eventually come to Portugal, but they take longer because the train needs to reach here. The train from Paris, that was the capital of trendy ideas at the time, eventually rode to Lisbon. So I don't really, as a couple of years ago, we were very happy of not having an extreme right party in our parliaments, and now we have 15 members of that extreme right party in parliament, as much as years that we have of democracy. So I do not have the hubris of thinking that we are completely immune to that anti-European ideas. I just think that they still haven't reached us yet, and perhaps when they reach us, somewhere else have discovered how to solve them. It's just a matter of time.
If you've got the funds.
From that point of view, and in a psychologist's approach, we have ups and downs. When we are up, we are the best of all the worlds, and we are down, we are the worst. And we keep coming from the bad to the worst, and the worst to the best, and we live in this kind of thing. But another point that I should stress, and that was the point also of Nuno, is that having policy, having law is important to create this European patriotism. Habermas talked about the constitutional patriotism. And in Europe, we are trying to create this idea of having a communion, a place where there are lots of cultures, lots of beliefs, lots of ways of thinking, but there's something that is common, and what is common is our law, having the separation of powers and the protection of human rights, and that's really important. And nowadays, with these threats from the United States, from Europe, from our own countries, we need to be very, very clear about it, and we should try to increase this idea. We have common law; it's a great thing. Rui talked about environmental law. Environmental law, it's a common law all over Europe. We are going to, no matter what country we are in Europe, even Hungary, even Poland, and they have the same law. We talk about human rights. Yes, we have some illiberal countries, but they are still on the frontier. They are not already autocratic regimes, but they can change. And it's important that we don't change, that we get to the things that make us being together and affirm ourselves as Europeans. It does not mean that we stop being German, Portuguese, Spanish, Danish. We are both things. It's the great thing that was done by the Treaty of Lisbon and by the Charter. You are member of a country, so you are citizen of the European Union. So that's really important. More questions? We still have time. Yes.
I was wondering, in both economical and political, when we talk about taxes and the national level of the taxes and about eventually having a national or European level of the taxes, I was wondering if before moving towards that discussion, should we discuss an integrated wage policy in European law? Because I think that having the sovereignty of each country regulating their tax policy is also a means to compensate wage differences between the countries. Or not, I don't know. We could discuss this, but it should be a tool that each country has to, each country has the capacity, the sovereignty to define the minimum wage, to define wage policy, also define direct tax policy, you know? It's, I don't know, I don't have a.
I would start by saying I would love to have the wages of Luxembourg. If I was paid like in Luxembourg, I would be very happy.
The living cost of Portugal.
Yeah, but the living cost of Portugal, exactly. And by the way, with Hungary, but also Slovakia, etc., they changed their tax system by adopting flat taxes. Which means basically a flat tax means that you're using a proportional rate. So everybody is taxed at 15% or 20%. What you have in Portugal, for instance, is low wages. Because why? We are lagging in Europe, right? We're consistently being in the back group. So for instance, now our minimum wage is around 900 euros. But if you go to Luxembourg, it's around 3,200.
That's why I'm questioning, I'm Portuguese.
Yeah, but that's a problem. I cannot have a wage of 3,200 in Portugal. That would mean unemployment.
But we also start.
Because I cannot imagine if, sorry, just to give you an example, imagine if you go to the supermarket and in Portugal and everybody earns 3,200 euros. What do you think will happen? Do you think that that supermarket will continue to exist by paying that amount to all its employees? It's impossible. So basically what happens is I will still have employment for those who are employed, for instance, for me, because I have a 2-year contract, right? So I would have employment, but the rest of you would not. So I would increase unemployment. And that's one of the things that Professor Luna was also saying. We are still different at the national level. For instance, economically, the Portuguese economy has nothing to do with German economy. It has nothing to do with Luxembourg economy, with the Dutch economy, et cetera, or even with Romanian or Bulgarian economy. So I cannot have the same, I can have principles on how to establish those minimum wages, for instance. And I can have principles about how to tax. The problem in Portugal is I have the taxation of rich countries for low wages.
But when we look for the cost of living, sometimes you can always compare to Central Europe countries that have a much higher wages.
I will give you an example.
If we have some policy like that, it's about principles and not settling a fixed amount for every country. Maybe we could like manage this difference because we also, I'm sorry, just to finish. We also see that many Central European people are still having their wages there and moving here because they can work remotely. Here, the cost of living is slightly lower, but not the huge difference. They can have more money available, they can have better lives than we have. And this is also increasing the cost of living in Portugal and other European countries.
But it's also giving you money because they're here, so they're spending here.
Yes, but there's also like, we discuss tax policy, European tax policy, we should also discuss that because the integration, the freedom of circulation and the economical freedom also leads to these consequences. That's what's important when it comes.
Of course, you're right that one of the forgotten areas in European integration is the social policy. Employment, wages, that is one of the social pillar is one of the forgotten pillars in European integration. Actually, we were trying to advance with that pillar with a huge summit in Porto during our presidency of the council, but then COVID. So nobody came, there was a Zoom call, and that really didn't took off. And our presidency had that problem during COVID. One of the ways to do that, for instance, that there was a project of a directive establishing a harmonized minimum wage that was established in terms of percentage of GDP. That was a way of establishing a minimum wage that was compatible with the differences in the economy. And I think that eventually we could do the same thing in terms of fiscal harmonization. But as I told your colleague, if there is a scandal, we already had scandals in terms of Luxembourg taxation and Irish taxation. And this took off. So I think if a disaster or a huge scandal happens, perhaps we can move on to fiscal harmonization. Otherwise, I'm not really that optimistic. That directive that I told you about harmonizing minimum wage was also frozen. So I'm also not that optimistic.
A small comment, because when it comes to direct tax, you have to understand that the taxation goes to the national budget.
Exactly.
So it's needed for the national budget. That's why it's not harmonized within the European Union. When you talk about indirect taxation, that's only harmonized because of the internal market. Because otherwise, if that would do like that, you Germans could shop in the Netherlands, for example, if the indirect taxation was quite low in the Netherlands compared to Germany. That's why you have to harmonize, not define at the same level playing field. We have different taxes, even though when it comes to indirect taxation. But when it comes to direct taxation, we're dealing with national sovereignty because you need those revenues to the national budget. So again, I'll go back to my point. The problem is that the economic and monetary union is not completed, it's an imbalance. So we need to strengthen the federal budget, the EU federal budget. That's the key topic that I would like to speak about. In order to correct all the economic imbalances that we have among the member states. So I don't think that the problem is with the direct taxation. It has to deal with the EU budget.
Any more questions?
Yes.
Please. Yeah.
Sorry for leaving, but it was a pleasure to be here with you.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure, Professor. Please.
In fact, my question supposed to be answered by
Just too late.
I believe that one of you can answer this question. As from non-EU citizens and citizens from former Portuguese colony in South, I'm so happy to learn that Portugal has find advantage being in the EU as a member, not only in terms of money as Ruth did, advising, but also from client's perspective. This different point of view enables us as former Portuguese colony citizens to understand how Portugal was gained from being a European member. But my question is, will EU overcome all the barriers, all the obstacles that as they mentioned by Professor Nuno, such as cultural barriers and lack of federal budgets, and how will EU be able to overcome all these obstacles?
That's the $1 million question.
No. I don't think that's really the motto of the European Union is united in diversity. So I think the idea that we are diverse, culturally diverse, is built into the DNA of the European Union. And it's also that this idea that we're always moving forward, despite the fact that we don't really know where we're going. But we need to enlarge and integrate with no real platform where we're going. But I think that losing the cultural diversity, European cultural diversity, would be losing one of our greatest assets, even in terms of not only culturally, but also economically. That idea that the perfect state has French chefs, German cars,
Portuguese wine.
Portuguese wine. Essential is not to have French. I won't go into much into that, but I think some of the cultural diversity and the problems that we have are unsurmountable. The European Union lives from crisis to crisis. I remember when I was doing my PhD in EU law, that one of the professors that found me in the corridors here told me, well, are you sure that you want to do your PhD in EU law? The EU is finished soon, for sure, because they was during the financial crisis. And here we are. We are living from crisis to crisis ever since the 50s. And somehow we're still, it's kind of a juringo, so somehow we're still here.
And we are serving as an example even for you, because if you look at WEMOA, if you look at BCAO, etc., that's the way, for instance, with BCAO, it's the way to guarantee some stability in Guinea-Bissau. You don't have a central bank. The central bank is the regional central bank, and is the way to guarantee that you're still in the market, that you still have some kind of stability. So although the European Union has problems, it still is politically an example for other regions in the world. For instance, in Africa with WEMOA and so.
After a conference last year, I wrote something that I entitled about the constitutional future of Europe. And my idea is that we need to reinvent us as the European Union all the time. And that means that reinvention, that we can adapt to all the situations and don't lose anyone. First of all, we have this idea of integration that could be harder and harder and should be harder and harder, but just for those who are really interested in that project. But we should have also the other ones in a kind of economical union without principle of supremacy and without complete integration. And that could be an idea of integrating Hungary, I don't know, Italy, and we don't know with other countries in the future. Even we can also try to have, in this idea that we already have with Africa, we could integrate the United Kingdom. And then we could have also a different level, a level of political cooperation. And in that level, of course, all these countries could be in, and we could even enlarge it to other countries. If you look at the last meetings of the EU, there is always a council. There is not just a council of the ministers of presidents of the EU, but it has been enlarged to Turkey, to the United States, to other countries that also want to be a part of the same values. And this idea could be a way of reinvent ourselves, having different levels of integration. The more high one would be the model of the EU, of course, like we are having now, but at the same time, try not to lose anyone and try to adapt our organs in a flexible way of integrating the other countries. Because if you look nowadays at the United Kingdom, the majority of them are upset because of the Brexit. And if the Brexit was now, they wanted to be on. And if we look at the United Kingdom, they are one of the oldest democracies in the world. And it's important to have them with us, even if they don't agree with integration, if they don't want to have the same device, the same money, but try to find a way to integrate it. So my idea is that we should try to find different levels from integration to simple political cooperation and create organs of the EU that could be join everybody that is in the same boat. So I think it's a good idea for the future. Well, Dia, please. You said that colleague never made a question, you have afterwards. Do you mind? Please.
My question is what rates that will be provided from EU membership, I think in the constant rate, but maybe you can give an example, like experience.
How it was affected by the EU membership, because you mentioned that lots of people come here for work, also for tourists, increasing prices and so on. So is it more beneficiary, or would you rather say, hey, come on, it's enough with the tourists?
Let us say tourism is important, and is important for our economy. But it has been before. The climate helps, and of course, the mood of the Portuguese, the tendency of speaking all the language and integrating everybody, even if some minorities don't react that way. But that helps. But that can be a good thing and a bad one. It's a good thing because it's a way of avoiding the deficit, to balance public policies and so on. But on the other hand, it means that we have an economy that is based in tourism and not in industry, not in new technologies and so on, as we should. So we also need to balance tourism with other fields. But I don't know if Good wants to add anything to that, because she is one from more in economics.
I would just, to me, the main problem is not the economical one, because it actually does not make that much of a pressure. Actually, what happens was that the city centers were completely degraded. And with the increase of tourism, we renovate those areas. It's true that now you have a beautiful city and a beautiful city center that is recovered, but it's also true, and that's the sad part for me. It's full of tourists and not of Portuguese people. So it's not the real Portugal that you see. Do you understand? For instance, you will have people trying to sell you pastéis de bacalhau com queijo da serra. So
Don't do it.
don't do it. They sell it like it's Portuguese, traditional. It's not. It's like cod pastry with some cheese. That's not typical. The same thing you will see, there's people in the city center trying to sell you cod and whatever, and you look at them, nothing against them, okay? But they're from Nepal or from Bangladesh or whatever. So they're not cooking traditional Portuguese food as we cook it, right? So that's a problem of identity. So it's like, I don't know if you've ever been to Prague, for instance, or to Barcelona. You get there and the city centers, the tourist parks where you have all the monuments, etc., they're not done for the people living there. They're full with tourists, and we believe that that's how it is. That's not us if you go to some places in Lisbon. So I would say that if you want to enjoy your stay, you should find some people that already live here in Lisbon, and they will take you to specific places to eat, to go out at night, to see, etc. Okay, so that's the advice I would give you. It's a wonderful city, it's a wonderful country. We love to have you, but if you really want to know us, don't go in those tourist traps that we already have as other big tourist places, and try to find Portuguese people to help you, or Brazilian people, or African people that live in Portugal for a while and help you with that.
Thank you very much.
Please.
Yes, we've been talking about how Europe is essentially founded around like a headless chicken, only reacting if there's a crisis. Do you believe that's the inevitable fate of Europe, or do you think something like, for example, the European Parliament that is truly independent and can properly act and change laws could a way to actually make Europe work on its own when it's shaken up by crisis?
You're saying that that's a bad thing. It's, the idea that we need, somebody knows, a Trump, somebody that would leave us, that has a plan, a tremendous plan to, the uphills, sunlit uphills that are the paradise. I don't really see that worked in Europe before, and so this idea of the idea of a strong independent parliament is kind of like that. The discussion, not really having a huge predefined plan, but that from discussions, the aim, the objective will arise. So the idea that there are a master plan somewhere for us to become the United States of Europe, and we need only to follow it, is something that is, I think, a bit frightening. I prefer us to not really know where we're heading, especially in a Trump world. I think we need to adapt to whatever, if Marines end up in Greenland, we need to, I don't think that there is any plan that could anticipate that kind of problem in the past. But this is a very Southern European perspective.
Exactly. I was thinking about that. It's a very German thought. And I remind myself of, I have a friend that is a policeman, and he worked for the safety and security of the 2004 Euro here in Portugal. And he had the German police coming because you had the Euro in Germany. And they were like, how did it work in Portugal? It was so perfect. There was no problems with security, nothing. And the Portuguese police was trying to explain a word that only exists in Portuguese. That is desenrascanço. There's no translation in any other language, which means basically we adapt, we'll see. So even the Portuguese police works like we'll see, and it works. And trying to explain this to the German police was a nightmare. How do you adapt it? So
the difference, the cultural difference is that to do something, the German need to have a plan. And the plan is prepared in advance and everything goes together with the plan and it works. But if there's a break, nobody knows what to do. It's the chaos. In Portugal, it's the opposite. We never have a plan. We go to things and sometimes nobody takes attention to it. So we decide to do what is adequate to the situation. And we know how to adapt in the last moment. So it's a different way. It does not work the same way, probably does not work so good as it does in Germany, but in the end it works. Something.
And probably that is why we are at the end of
we adapt. And by the way, if you hear in Portuguese saying in principle, it means never. Okay, so that's a different kind of mentality. So for you, in principle, it will happen. For us, it won't.
Okay, so I think it was a great session. I hope you've learned a lot from these meetings. We like very much having you here. You can come again if you want this year or afterwards. It seems that you are in the first year. You can come more often afterwards. Now the faculty will offer you a light meal. We are going upstairs to the place of the professors, and we are going to have a light meal. You are all invited, even those who are not from the group. I believe it will be food enough for all of you, even the Portuguese here and the others, because it's interesting to have this kind of things. And I hope you enjoy your stay.
Thank you so much for having organized everything, because without Professor Pereira Silva, we wouldn't have been able to sit here at the Portuguese University. And thanks to the panelists giving so much input. And I guess we learned a lot about the Portuguese and still things to talk over. And thanks a lot once again.